Hume's law is correct, the is-ought gap is real. However, most people misinterpret it and overextend it. The is-ought gap is a constraint on moral reasoning, but it is not in itself a proof of moral nihilism or subjectivism. The is-ought gap basically states that there is a difference between descriptive claims and normative claims. You cannot derive norms from descriptions about reality. You cannot derive an ought from an is. And that is true. However, most people overextend this to mean that morality is arbitrary or subjective. If you cannot derive norms from what is objectively in the world, then if you do come up with some kind of norms, they must pertain to the subjective, not the objective, but the subjective. Therefore, morality is subjective or meaningless or arbitrary. But this is incorrect, of course. We'll get into it, but it is a separate claim. Hume's law doesn't say this. Hume's law, again, is simply a constraint on moral reasoning. You cannot derive an ought from an is. Now, the idea that because you cannot derive an ought from an is arbitrary, morality is therefore arbitrary or meaningless or subjective, that it is a separate claim, separate to Hume's law. They are not one and the same thing. They are separate things, and it is an incorrect claim. MetaEthics accepts Hume's law, but rejects the leap into subjectivism. And it shows that it is possible for a moral framework to be objective and, more importantly, non-arbitrary. We start with the first axiom. Reality and awareness are the ground of ethics. For ethics to have any kind of normative authority, it must be grounded in something which is non-optional, non-arbitrary. This is known as the grounding problem in moral philosophy. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves, is there such a thing that is non-arbitrary that we can ground ethics in? And there is such a thing, that is the reality and awareness field. Reality and awareness here are understood minimally simply as the fact that something is reality and that experience occurs, awareness. Regardless of what we want to make of these fields, if reality is this or that, a simulation or not, if awareness, what is consciousness, if it's a byproduct of the brain or not, if reality and awareness are one and the same thing or separate things, and so on. All of that is not really relevant here. What is relevant here is to simply assert, and we can confidently assert that something is, there is something here, and that there is experience, awareness, and that these fields, or this field, is unavoidable. And proof that it is unavoidable is that to deny it, or to doubt it, or to assert it, or to agree with it, or to reject it, is to assert. We can only deny or doubt or agree or disagree with reality and awareness in reality, while being aware of it. Therefore, reality and awareness are non-arbitrary, and because they are non-arbitrary, they possess this unique trait of non-arbitrariness. They are therefore the only appropriate ground for ethics. From the first, we go to the second axiom, which is unity, structural coherence. We ask ourselves, what is the most fundamental trait of this non-arbitrary field of reality and awareness? And the answer is unity, structural coherence. And besides being obvious that there is a unified field encompassing and interlinking everything, the proof for unity to be the most fundamental trait is that any other trait presupposes it. Any other trait that you can think of, any other trait in this reality and awareness field, presupposes, necessitates, and it is preceded by unity in order to exist, or in order to be meaningful or intelligible in any way, whatever other trait we can think of. Energy, time, space, entropy, quality of first-person perspective, memory, whatever it may be, all these other traits can only exist in a unified field, in a structural coherent unified field. Therefore, unity, it is the most fundamental trait of this non-arbitrary field of reality and awareness. And now we bridge. So far we have a description of the world, specifically of metaphysical structures. Nothing in these structures have normativity in them, so we bridge the norm. We bridge into the norm. If we have unity as the most fundamental trait of this non-arbitrary field of reality and awareness, then our actions and intentions, behavior, can be objectively, and more importantly, in a non-arbitrary manner, be evaluated in contrast with that unity. In other words, our actions can be more or less congruent with unity, can be more or less aligned with the structural coherence of this unavoidable non-arbitrary field. So we have our third axiom, congruence with unity. This becomes our moral criterion. This becomes our objective standard for moral evaluation. Objectively, and again, more importantly than being objective, is the fact that it is a non-arbitrary criterion, because many moral frameworks can be objective within their chosen arbitrary premise, but none of them have a non-arbitrary premise. That's why this is relevant. That's why MetaEthics is relevant, is because it provides us with a non-arbitrary standard for moral evaluation. So we have bridged from metaphysical description of metaphysical structures into normativity, congruence with unity. We have created a bridge. However, we have created a non-arbitrary bridge. That is the crucial distinction. It is not an arbitrary preference. It is not based on moral or divine decree or emotionality or social consensus. It is a non-arbitrary bridge from non-arbitrary metaphysical structures. Hence the name MetaEthics, the ethics of metaphysical congruence. Meta comes from metaphysical, because we are grounding ethics in metaphysical structures, but it also comes from these metaphysical structures being a meta frame, because all other frames, all other possible frames for moral frameworks, maximizing well-being, and so on, are chosen premises that are all junior to this wider, bigger, all-encompassing frame premise of reality and awareness. So it is a mother of all frames, a meta frame, MetaEthics. So MetaEthics does not violate Hume's law. It works within Hume's rightful constraint. But Hume's law blocks simply direct is-ought derivations. It does not block a non-arbitrary moral framework grounded in reality and awareness.